Hi there, it's Marcus again. I've been thinking about how we as people fit into the big picture of history and futures. And I'd like to share with you some thoughts I've got on this. It's something I've actually written about at some level. But in this particular case, I'd just like to walk us through it. So I'm going to share screen and give you my thoughts on the three deaths. So here we go. All righty. So we have three depths, I'm arguing, and it's about accountability, it's about memory and death and transformation. So let's move on. So for me, we're in time. We're stuck in time like ants in amber here. We are framed, as in my image here, of pasts, presents, and futures. There's no one past, there's no one present, there's no one future. There are multiple past, presents, and futures. It really depends on context, where you are, gender, psychological makeup, historical moments in time, and all that sort of stuff. And that means that we have a relationship to both our pasts, our presents, and our futures. And I'm going to unpack a little bit of that thinking for you in this short video. So I want to start off with Adrienne Maree Brown, who I think is a wonderful human being. And she says this: I am ruminating on life, death, and meaning, because for me, the reality that I will die is a component of how I approach accountability day to day. I accept that my singular life is not everlasting and that I have a mysterious timeline, because we'll never know when we're going to die and all that sort of stuff, in which to have this particular human experience. I have thought and felt a lot about my spiritual responsibility in this life and concluded that I don't want to spend time on causing or perpetuating harm. I want my lifetime to be part of an evolution toward ending unnecessary harm and suffering for my species and planet. There's a link beneath that to this particular online article. It's a murmuration, it's called. This is where Adrienne Maree Brown puts down her thoughts on a monthly basis. Wonderful thinker she is. Now, before I go back to her for a moment, I just want to present you with this concept, okay? And some of you will have met it already, perhaps, but to me, it's really important to understand that where we stand today, we're standing on the shoulders of multiple generations of human beings. We have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024, that's a kilobyte, 2048, we're going back 11 generations, okay? And the 12th generation is 4,096. So that's just over 400 years ago. There were 4,000 plus human beings on the planet. All of these generations are human beings with the same kinds of longings, fears, hopes, insecurities, the good luck and the bad luck, the tragedies and so on that constitute every individual life. No life is the same, but of course we share certain things in common. And we are the result of people coming together, could be in love, could be horrible sexual violence and rape, it could be any of those things, and no doubt it's a mix. We are deeply and intimately biologically linked to our past generations. That's the linear side. But beyond that, these people lived in communities. There was nature around them. There were trees and forests and full moons and rainy days and heat waves and cold days. All of that, the whole world in which these people lived. And of course, going back 400 years, no one knew that Australia was on the face of the earth, except, of course, those who lived here, and maybe a couple of Chinese pirates from up north or Indonesians, but most people didn't know we were here. Yet we are here now. And we're here, of course, and it's cost us to be here. It's cost not just us. It hasn't cost us so much, really. It's cost people in the past. And I want to come to that in a moment. So what can we say then? For me, one of the things about looking at the past is we can use the past as a way of thinking about what we do today. we often find in conservative politics the desire to glorify the past, to want to go back to a pure past, a past when, you know, men were men and women were women, or when, you know, white people were unquestionably better than all the rest, or English people, or German, or whatever country your forebears come from. But that's the darker side. That's the shadow side of our history. There's a lot in all our pasts, in our faith traditions like Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Judaism, Buddhism. You know, there's a lot there, but there's also a lot even in the agnostic and atheistic past that some of us no doubt share in this secular world we live. There are all sorts of aspects to our past that actually we can be proud of. But there are also shameful pasts, and we're caught in that thing. But creative traditionalism is about sorting through and adopting and emphasizing those aspects of our past which we can be proud of and which we can develop and take forward into our futures, plural. So as Tosh says, we need to know how far one's action and thought are conditioned by this past, by the heritage of the past. This may sound like a prescription for conservatism, but as I'm arguing, what it offers is a realistic foundation for radical initiatives. That looking at our past, looking at the resources that come to us from past generations, resources that might be intellectual or technological, they might be spiritual or emotional, psychological and cultural, all of those, that we can draw on those which actually affirm our humanity and affirm our commitment to one another, to community, to nature, to the world around us in different ways. So what I'm thinking about here is that we're like those ants in amber in temporal context, as Adrienne Maree Brown's finitude is there. Finitude is that our lives are going to be short. Doesn't matter whether you live 100 years, geological time, that's nothing, okay? It might be only living to 20 or 30 years of age. We don't know what's going to happen. And that we are relationally connected, which is another form of that amber, really, that I think about, that this amber here is what is important to think of. So where do we go? All right, then. So what's the big question? Well, this is an Adrienne Maree Brown, AMB, from the same article as the past one. And what if you don't really think about this at all, about all this connection? What happens if we just live in a sort of single two-dimensional present? What if from the time you were born, you were given a story by somebody else, by your culture, your parents, combination, the schools, the politics, in which you don't really need to be accountable? We just, like the ant, suspended in amber, permanently in a present in which there was no real past. We don't have to worry about what our ancestors did or anything like that. There is no present other than by subjective little bubble in which my own neuroses are my own playground, or any future before us. The future doesn't exist yet. We can't be held accountable for any of that. This is a really interesting question. It's the sort of question that Adrienne Maree Brown often asks, and she has different goes at trying to respond to that question. It's really not a question that you answer, it's a question that you think about and through, okay? So what I want to suggest to you in this particular recording is that we have depths, relational connections, and we have depth to the pasts behind us and our presents and our futures. Well, what does that mean? Well, let me unpack it a little bit. So the past, what did it take for us to make our world? How did we as a civilization, as a society, as a species get to where we are? Well, animals went extinct. Cultures were obliterated or colonized. Our own ancestors were often shackled, like these kids, to machines in the early stages of industrialization. So much was taken from the past. Lives lost, lives of or like these in the industrial period, lives of, that were almost hopeless, that had very little other than just eking out a meager existence. Of course, we can go right back to lives of serfs and peasants in the pre-modern period. We can go back to lives in different civilizations, in different societies, where there was slavery was endemic or whatever. There's a lot that it's taken to get us here, and we owe the pasts behind us a debt which we can pay through historical memory, through embracing and affirming and recognizing that what makes a society, any society, is built on the shoulders of those who came before, animals, plants, the living world around us as well. And that it comes at a major cost. It was Max Weber who said, look, civilization is premised on violence, okay? And that the state today is the only entity that has you could say, the right to exercise violence to maintain itself. So what about the present? Well, here we are digging big holes. We've still got people shackled to machines. That just doesn't happen so often in our part of the world, let's say Australia. We are tearing the world apart, like deforesting. We have animals like these rabbits, but they're chickens, cows, all totally subjugated to the human will. And of course, not just animals subjugated to the human will, we also have humans subjugated to the human will. This is a fantastic photograph by a Chinese visual artist who was photographing the world of itinerant workers who come into the large cities like Shanghai to work for a pittance in the major factories, and they actually hired and lived in these little cages that were kind of like home, and then they would send all their money back, or most of their money back, to the villages from which they came. Okay, so human beings right now, the planet right now, animals right now, trees right now, foliage, everything is being extracted from, commodified, enslaved in a way, violated. And we owe something, we owe a debt to the world that we live in today, right now, for the world that we live in, the privilege that we enjoy. And what about the future? Well, all that deforestation and everything, all that enslavement and suffering can lead, means that we are chewing up the future, we're eating it up. What do we owe to future generations for what we have today? Well, that's a Blade Runner type picture there. We have dystopic futures, climate change, or we might have elegantly curated futures, such as those tall buildings in a solar punk world. There are futures of AI human interactions. Perhaps the human becomes something other than human in the future. We don't know. But what is certain is that the rate we're chewing up certain forms of resources today, we are impoverishing the future. We are taking resources away from future generations, from the living biosphere of the planet, from the material, physical structure of the planet, that are going to come at a cost for future generations. And we don't necessarily have to pay that cost ourselves. That's a gobsmacking thought. So we have these debts. How do we repay these debts? Well, debts are relational bonds. I don't think we need to suddenly think, okay, I've got to become a minimalist, sell my house, stop driving cars, stop flying from here to there, stop eating animals or whatever else. These things are kind of very useful tools, perhaps in offsetting some of it. But it's, as much as anything, it's about being conscious of our relational debts and of honouring them, about doing the best history we can, about working in the present to lighten our ecological, environmental, social, cultural footprint. It's about looking towards the future and thinking about our choices and our decisions today, with an eye to the future, so that we can reduce the impact of our actions today on future generations and on the planet as a whole in the future. We can't extract or separate the human from the more than human or the non-human, the materiality of our planet. So this means that we need to ask questions. Well, what if? Rob Hopkins, fantastic guy, got a great podcast, which is over here on the side here, the podcast series. It's an active link. Yep, it's an active link. And you can click on it and go and find it and listen to some of them. They're well worth listening to, but their thought experience, a bit like the Adrienne Maree Brown thought experience. So given the state of the world, Hopkins says, the message of despair is pretty convincing. It looks grim out there, right? But something about this doesn't sit quite right with me. Like Hopkins, like me, I'm an optimist. I'm an optimist because I think there's something present in human culture and the human makeup, you could say, that finds ways around problems. It's not that I'm believing in technology or anything like that. It's just that we cannot know what really is going on around us, but we keep making decisions. And if we are thinking about the indebtedness we have to our pasts, presents, and futures, we start to behave differently. We start to see the world differently, and that's so important. So in fact, if Popper goes on, there's evidence that things can change and that cultures can change rapidly and unexpectedly. History is littered with examples like that. And that's not just naive pie-in-the-sky thinking, says Hopkins. No, things are going on, and we need to be aware that we are actually always part of that going on, whether it's maintaining business as usual, whether it's transforming our way of seeing the world so that we can see the world as historically constructed, linking relationally to people in the past, not just people, but more than human in the past, what's happening in the present and what's going on as we enter our futures out there, and as we construct this possibility to be indebted in a way that empowers us. This is not a debt that we carry like a burden. It's a debt that invites us to be the best we can be, to live and love and care for what we can in the scope of our human lives, being aware that we're part of planetary processes that we can't possibly really fully comprehend. So that's where the three debts take me. I hope this has been a useful thought bubble. Thank you and goodbye.